One of the best story-driven CRPGs, if not the best story-driven CRPG of all time, has just turned 25 years old. So, to celebrate the birthday boy, let's talk about some interesting things that you might not know about Planescape Torment. Let's start with abandoned ideas and cut content. Planescape Torment was definitely one of those games that fell victim to pressing deadlines, specifically the god of all deadlines, holiday season. Colin McComb, one of the designers, said this for RPG Watch. We'd been working incredibly long hours, like 100-hour weeks, and we came to realize that unfinished work like dialogue, subplots, and extra coolness had to be shelved if we wanted to get the game out in time for Christmas. Anything that was not crucial to advancing the main story of the game was evaluated and ruthlessly slashed, unless it had a completely minuscule amount of work left. Well, we'll never know how many great ideas have decorated the cutting room floors of different projects, but we do have a pretty good idea about Torment. Let's start with something big, playable character class. The vision statement from 1997, which was basically a pitch to the management of Interplay, hints that the Nameless One could originally become a priest. Here are the relevant excerpts. The player is not locked into any one class right at the start. Rather than being stamped with a label at the beginning, fighter, mage, thief, priest, your actions in the game define your character. Then, the document says that the Nameless One has the ability to cast spells beyond his current level and get various priest and thief benefits much earlier than normally allowed. Obviously, the idea was scrapped, and Fall from Grace is the only playable priest or cleric in the game. Chris Avallone, the lead designer, said this on the topic. We intentionally distanced ourselves from the gods of the D&D universe, since we were concerned it would detract from the plot. There was already more than enough that had to be explained and fleshed out, so throwing the powers in felt like more baggage. Having most of the in-game events happen in Sigil makes a lot of sense, as the Lady of Pain keeps all deities away from the City of Doors. Speaking of the Lady of Pain, although she only appears in dialogues and pre-rendered cutscenes, she does have a fully functional character sprite in the game files. It could be that it was made for the purposes of these cutscenes, but it's also possible that she was to make an actual in-game appearance. However, I think it's great that she hadn't, as her being out of the player's reach and shrouded in mystery is essential to staying true to the source material. The Planescape campaign setting says that, quote, the Lady of Pain's little more than an icon that crystallizes the mood of the campaign setting. Player characters should never deal with her. She doesn't give out missions, she never grants powers to anyone, and they can't rob her temples because she hasn't got any. If she ever does make an appearance, it should be simply to reinforce the wonder and mystery of the whole place, unquote. And the way she was implemented in Planescape Torment does exactly that, and I love it. Now, since we're talking about rulers, let's go quite a few power ranks down to Pharod, the King of Rags. Apparently, he was supposed to be a lot more cunning than in the final game. In the original vision statement, it is mentioned that, quote, if the player reveals he has forgotten himself, Pharod bleeds the player for as much money and favors as he can wring out of him. If I were to guess, the idea was abandoned for the sake of pacing. Torment's story really takes its sweet time to develop, so additional slowdowns in the early game wouldn't do it any favors. A similar decision but concerning the late game was made about Cursed when it slid from the Outlands to the plane of Carceri. Originally, we were supposed to search for the prison town, but in the final game we are conveniently provided a portal straight to Curst-in-Carceri. Aside from potentially robbing the story of its momentum, adding another plane of existence that isn't half-assed probably wasn't doable on time and budget. However, it's not that Black Isle did not want to add more planes. Colin McComb told RPG Watch that he wanted to do Mount Celestia in the upper planes and expand Baator. Sadly, Black Isle just couldn't afford it. Limbo was considered as well, and it sort of made it into the game in the form of dialogue. Black Isle also wanted to include all 15 factions of Sigil, but that also proved impossible. I especially regret that the Ethar didn't make it. Long story short, it's a faction that believe that gods do not deserve worship. Colin McComb actually wanted to include them, but dropped the idea because, quote, the whole no powers rule in the game kind of obviated their involvement. And I disagree, I think it could add a lot to the philosophy of Torment, but I suppose doing it right would be costly. After all, half measures lead to quarter results, so maybe it was for the best. As for expanding things, in the Alley of Lingering Sighs, we have to help the sentient alley that can't expand because of a Dabbas doing maintenance work there. In the original vision statement though, the alley was supposed to be pregnant and afraid to give birth because it was scared of being discovered by the Harmonium officers, who in turn were investigating the murder of the Nameless One. The most recent one, after which the game starts, that is. It's really weird to say these things aloud. Anyway, one thing I stumbled upon is that the area was originally called the Alley of Birth. That's what the ambient sound sample from Torment's website was called. The funny thing is, they had to explain what an MP3 was and recommended downloading Winamp. Man, this did feel like using a time machine. Although, I think we're slowly forgetting MP3. I suspect some of the Gen Z might not know what it is or have never used it. But I digress. Anyway, the Nameless One was supposed to get rid of the officers to allow the alley to give birth. This would result in spontaneous appearance of additional streets and a new portal that would take us to the next scene. Presumably the lower ward where Mort is kidnapped or school-napped. But you know who else was supposed to be kidnapped? Annah or Fall from Grace, as a way to mock the damsel in distress trope. There was a quest in Modron Cube where an evil wizard would kidnap either companion. Funnily enough, Grace's reaction was to be enthusiastic because she had never been kidnapped before. Chris Avallone even shared Grace's voice sample from this quest.
This is quite exciting. I've never been kidnapped before.
And he apparently really regrets it didn't make the cut. And Grace was voiced by Jennifer Hale, by the way, the voice of the female Commander Shepard. Although there is no voice sample of Annah's reaction to the kidnapping, she wasn't too happy about it, and I think we can imagine it.
If I were you, I'd be prepared to pick up your teeth.
Speaking of voice files, especially for Annah, there is an easy way to explore all game files with a tool called Near Infinity. This way, you can listen to all recorded character dialogue, including those left out of the game. Among these, my favorite are the ones with Annah's love confession.
I have to stay. You see, I love you. I don't care what you say to this. I don't want you to say anything. But I can't let you die here.
Now, I'm sure they were cut on purpose, and I think the final version of the romance is on point. Some things are just better left unsaid. As the Nameless One put it, he didn't need Annah's words to know her heart. Another cut part of the game's audio was a completely different soundtrack by a dark ambient composer, Brian Williams, professionally known as Lustmord. You see, Mark Morgan, who composed the music you hear in-game, was hired just 6 weeks before the release. The reason for the change was that towards the end of the development cycle, the producer changed, and the new guy just wanted a different kind of music for Torment. And thus, Lustmord's soundtrack, allegedly consisting of 46 tracks, was shelved. As for Mark Morgan, it's amazing what results he managed to produce in such short time frame. I mean, 6 weeks before the release gives you what, realistically? 2 weeks to write, record and produce? That's insane. Unfortunately, we'll probably never hear Lustmord's soundtrack for Torment. An RPG Codex user allegedly did try to contact him, but Lustmord just wasn't interested. The good news is, you can listen to a few samples of his work if you do some digging. One of his tracks can be heard in the cinematic trailer for Planescape Torment, the one you're watching right now. Moreover, you can still find 2 songs called Torment Bat 01 and Torment Fact 01 online. There is also a remix by Ghost Dog on SoundCloud called Planescape Torment Lost Tracks Remix, and it features both tracks. Finally, if you want something straight from the source, some of Lustmord's music for Torment was reused in his album entitled Metavoid. Indeed, some parts of the track The Eliminating Angel clearly use samples from the trailer I mentioned. The same goes for the songs Blood Deep in Dread and A Light That Is Darkness. So, if you want to have an idea of what Torment's soundtrack might have sounded like originally, definitely give Lustmord's Metavoid a listen. Another song that is missing from the game is the alternate theme for the Smoldering corpse bar. However, it is present in the game files and can be restored by the Unfinished Business mod. Then, the song plays at the bar at night. And finally, the Mysterious Credits song, which is missing from the official soundtrack, including the Beamdog's remastered one. It was probably composed by Pull, which I assume was a band or maybe still is, who knows. I suspect the reason it's missing from the soundtracks is that the original uncompressed recording is probably missing too. I highly doubt it has anything to do with copyright. However, it was included in the GOG's original release of Torment, but with lower bitrate than the rest of the music, and therefore I assume it was ripped from the credits video itself. While we're at it, I always wondered why there are 3 ending tracks on the soundtrack: good ending, neutral ending, and bad ending, even though only one of them is used in-game. Maybe nobody told Mark Morgan there is only one ending, but in the original vision statement, Torment was to have 3 different endings. The bad ending was to just walk away. The Nameless One would wake up in the mortuary yet again and saddened Mord would greet him back to life once more. The neutral ending is pretty much what we got in the final game. In this case, the Nameless One would perform the so-called last rites. This is actually what the game was to be called originally, Last Rites, but another game beat Interplay to it. Could be the zombie first-person shooter from 1997. Torment was the Plan B title, and so Torment the game became. Either way, the Nameless One would convince the Transcendent One to rejoin him, and TNO, now Hall, would serve his punishment in the battlefields of the Blood War. Honestly, I'm glad they kept this one and just fleshed it out. It seems like a fitting end to the Nameless One's journey. Finally, the good ending was what many players want, to have their cake and eat it too. The Nameless One would destroy the Transcendent One and enjoy life of immortality. But that's kind of lame given everything that happens up to that point. Another interesting thing I dug up from the Wayback Machine are screenshots from around September 1998. They come from a preview by Stefan Janicki, aka Deathlock. They show a really Baldur's Gatesy interface. It looks pretty raw, but I think I would have liked to see it refined rather than the one that made it into the final game. Another preview by 3D Gaming, among others, showed a different bestiary, which also looked cooler in my opinion. Well, what's lost is lost, but there is some good news to wrap up the cut content part. Some unimplemented stuff, like a few quests, characters, and items, was restored in a mod called Unfinished Business Reloaded. It works with both the classic and the enhanced edition and comes with many translations too. Interestingly, Beamdog had a permission to include it in the enhanced edition, but they eventually decided against it. So, if you're not hellbent on playing the game as it was shipped, Unfinished Business is a must-have. I mean, wouldn't you like to see Mord hitting on the female zombies in the mortuary? Okay, now that we have cut content out of the way, let's talk about several things that go beyond the game itself. One of the most interesting things about Ravel Puzzlewell is that her fragments stretch beyond Torment. Chris Avellone confirmed that the Seer in Icewind Dale Heart of Winter and the elderly cat lady from Targos in Icewind Dale 2 are fragments of Ravel. What's interesting, they are not necessarily the only ones, but they are the only confirmed ones. As Avellone put it, Ravel's existence is like the branching of a great tree across the plains. The clues that someone is Ravel's incarnation include being female, bad eyesight or blindness, and usually old age. They also have dreams or visions of the plains, as they are subconsciously tied to other fragments of Ravel throughout the plains. Personally, I wonder if April from the Spellhold in Baldur's Gate 2 is a fragment of Ravel or her offspring. After all, Ravel did have at least one daughter, and April had visions of the Lady of Pain and apparently the Nameless One at the Pillar of Skulls. As for the face she might have been seeing, have you ever wondered who's on the box cover of Planescape Torment? Well, it's none other than Guido Henkel, who was the producer before quitting and being replaced towards the end of the development cycle. The story he shared on his blog says that the model that was hired for the job couldn't make it, and so he stepped in. The makeup was done by Tom Berman, a Hollywood veteran, so the final result was definitely really cool. Well, maybe this wouldn't have been the only box cover with his face on it if things had turned out differently. After all, Chris Avellone did have some ideas for sequels to Planescape Torment, but they never went beyond one-page vision statement and were never submitted to the publisher. The first one, Planescape Lost Souls, was to be both a prequel and a sequel that offered a different perspective on the planes. The Nameless One wouldn't have been in it though. However, the game was to feature some of his old crew, namely Deonara, Zachariah, and Fall from Grace, as well as some of the antagonists of Torment, like Ravel and Trias. The second sequel was to be entitled Planescape Pariah and featured Dakan as the protagonist. The game would tell the story of his efforts to unite the Githyanki and Githzerai. The reason these ideas were never seriously considered was exactly what I said a second ago about the endings. Chris Avellone felt that the story of Torment was properly concluded and doing any sort of sequel would just feel wrong. Not everyone felt that way though. Way back in 2012, a group of fans were allegedly working on a mod called Planescape Damnation, a direct sequel to Torment as the title suggests. The mod was sort of announced on the Candlekeep forums, but the original poster disappeared from the thread after a while. Looking back, it all sounded too good to be true, so I have my doubts if this was legit. Even if it was, the problem with such ambitious mods is that they are rarely completed, but it apparently doesn't stop creators from thinking their project is going to be different. But most of them simply aren't. But guess what? As of right now, another mod, Blizzard in Baator, is in the making. This one, however, aims to be an extra chapter within Torment. Not much is known about it at the moment, and I'm pretty skeptical to be honest. Well, on the other hand, the possibilities to create amazing things at home at no budget are incomparably greater than they were even 10 years ago, so maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised yet. I'm also a bit concerned about the English localization, as it seems Polish is the source language. It's not easy to match the writing quality of Torment to begin with, but it's even more challenging to do so in two completely different languages. The translator has to be an even better writer than the author to do so. At any rate, I am not holding my breath, but I do wish them all the best and I'll gladly play Blizzard in Baator if or when it comes out. Well, to wrap this all up, let me remind you that if you don't feel like reinstalling Torment, you can just read it. That's right, there's a free novelization of the game based on the original script, and it's even bundled with the GOG release. There is also an official novel by Ray and Valerie Valles, but it differs a lot from the game. For example, the Nameless One has a name from page 1, Thane. I wonder if that's how Thane from Mass Effect 2 got his name. After all, he had these weird flashbacks too. Probably a coincidence. Either way, don't expect Chris Avellone tier writing, and remember that the book is long out of print, so it might require some effort to get a hold of it. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, consider giving it a thumbs up and writing a comment to appease the algorithm, the fickle ruler of YouTube. It's not easy to get noticed, but anything is possible with your help. Thank you and see you next time.